Hello, everybody. Welcome to the weekly Blender-oriented CG Cookie stream. Today is a free stream. We usually reserve those for citizen members, but try to do a free one occasionally.
Welcome
And
to
this one also being the
weekly
first genre of
Blender-oriented
artist
CG
study,
Cookie
as
stream.
I'm calling it. Figured it would be a good
today
way
is a
to
free
make
stream.
free, and so that
We
is
usually
available
reserve
to
those for
anyone and
citizen
everyone.
members, but try to do a free one occasionally.
Yeah, so welcome
And,
to
this one also
this
being the
artist
first
study
genre
on
of
the artist known
study,
as
as I'm
Beeple.
calling it.
I have
Figured it
been
would be
super
good. Today's a free
excited
stream,
about
and
this.
so
This
that is
I think has the
available to
record
anyone and
for
everyone.
the furthest out
Yeah,
scheduling
so
of a live
welcome
stream.
to
It's been
this
available.
artist study
Oh no, I have an
the artist
echo.
known as Beeple.
That's not good.
I have been super.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. So I was playing the stream as well. My fault. Hopefully that's solved now. Let me know in the chat if that's solved. That was my fault. But yeah, so I had the idea months ago and reached out to Beeple to ask if I could use his artwork and on the stream, and he very kindly, generously said yes. Okay, cool. It's glad to see that's fixed. Awesome. And so thank you, Beeple. If you ever see this, I appreciate you letting us do this. Huge fan, which will be definitively proven by the end of this stream. But yeah, so Beeple. Let's talk about why we're going to be learning about Beeple. Beeple is Mike Winkleman, and here's a stat sheet of sorts. He's an American digital artist and designer. He specializes in abstract art, VJ loops, which, like music that has visual aids, kind of that, loop, and that's kind of VJ loops. I haven't ever done those, but didn't know if anyone else needed that explained. Concert graphics, I've heard him say in a presentation that he's done concert graphics for Katy Perry and one of her tours. He's done album art for Imagine Dragons. So you've maybe even seen some of his art before. He also does these things called everydays, which is one of his maybe biggest claims to fame, in that for over 10 years now, he's done a daily image from start to finish. Every single day. He's not missed a single day. I've heard him say that even on the day that his child was born, he managed to do an everyday. And so that means, we'll look at the math, but he has thousands, nearly 4,000 images in his portfolio, in addition to everything he does professionally, which I couldn't find a ton of information aside from the Katy Perry and Imagine Dragons stuff, just because I couldn't find a LinkedIn or a traditional resume. But he's a very successful artist, and his everydays alone, that's what we're going to be focusing on primarily today. And I think we can glean a lot of information out of those. But as far as tools, he uses Cinema 4D and Octane primarily. And, that's just kind of a stat. We're a Blender crowd here. And so at this point in 2018, it's not terribly, significant which software is used. Software is advancing so much, and we all know how powerful Blender is. All of these things can be, all these techniques that we study about Beeple can be achieved in probably whatever software you choose. A quick question from William: did his computer ever break? I don't know. He's got to have the highest end workhorse computer, given how he renders really intense things, a lot of reflections and caustic. So he's got to have a really good computer. Who knows if it's broken? I mean, that would not be surprising at all if it has. But I don't know. I tried to be very quick with my communication. I feel like he's a big deal, and I didn't want to badger him with requests. So anyway, so he's very proficient at modeling, shading, lighting, compositing, procedural animation, basically everything in the 3D pipeline, composition at an artistic sense. And I put voice. That's how I describe someone who uses their art to speak, to convey an idea. He's very good at that. And I feel like that's necessary to put in the stat sheet, because so often 3D artists lack a voice. Often it's just the art of recreating something. It's not so much conveying something or expressing something from yourself. And so he's very good at that as well. And his portfolio is massive, as I've talked about. His everydays alone means he has about 4,000 images. It's huge, and not just images. Like I probably have 4,000. I don't know if that many. Like work in progress. Like halfway done models, or here's today's progress compared to tomorrow's, and whatever. These are like start to finish in like pieces of art basically. So he has it's massive. As far as I know, he works alone. He's I mean, especially with his everydays, like that's just him, and he's an absolute powerhouse in that sense. So whatever, this is a resume. Like, let's actually look at some of his work at this point. And yeah, okay. So being a free stream, if this is your first time here, or if you're a member of CG Cookie, this environment, this format is great for asking questions and getting pretty much immediate feedback. So if you can, we got a fairly primitive system in the chat. If you could like add a prefix of like question, like the word question in all caps, or a Q or something to let me know that it's a question, because otherwise I'm just looking for a question mark and that can get confusing. But anyway, yeah, so that's how you can ask questions. I'm going to try and keep an eye on that so we can interact and stuff. But the first thing I want to do is just let his work speak a little bit. And we'll go over to his website, just beeplecrap.com. He's got a pretty interesting personality. I love how expressive he is and blunt about things. But you'll probably see that if you start following him, which I highly recommend. So here we can see like he's got these films. He's got VJ clips and then everydays and resources and things like that. But the first thing I ever saw about Beeple that I knew was his work was this 0 Day short. So I'm going to play a little bit of that and let that do some talking. Again, it is the first thing I ever heard or saw from him. So let's just take a moment and watch a bit of that.
For the past few months now, the nation's top military, intelligence, and law enforcement officials have been warning Congress and the country about a coming cyber attack.
Another weapon added to the arsenal in cyber warfare.
We have entered into a new phase of conflict in which we use a cyber weapon to create physical destruction.
A battle is waging across the internet.
140 cyber attacks on U.S. companies.
30 million lines of code written.
The U.S. considers it an act of war.
Well, the messages don't mess with us.
So you can watch this. I recommend watching it. But what struck me is the fact that he was a single artist, and the quality of modeling, quality of texturing, shading, lighting, compositing, composition, and animation on top of all that he's doing that as a single artist. Obviously, like it was a staff pick on Vimeo. He's got a few staff picks. So super impressive work. And that hooked me on him. And I started looking him up and then got onto his everyday work. But before we get into there, like check out some of his like VJ clips. I find them mesmerizing. If we go look at those real quick. I just also, on top of being like static images, which is what his everydays are, like he still does animation on top of that. And being a generous guy, like these are Creative Commons. He says you can use them for anything commercial or non-commercial if you happen to be a VJ. But just for visuals and knowing if you've been doing 3D much, like that animation, it kind of separates men from the boys in a way. And so to see some of these clips, like I swear I've lost hours just getting entranced by it. And it's one of my favorite yeah, I can just get lost in this stuff. It's so cool. But also the movies, so this can kind of go on and on. And you've also seen his name's Midge on Twitter. He's started doing some similar things with Blender, like these looping abstract animations, and no doubt he's been inspired by Beeple. But yeah, just trying to give you a feel for like what quality of work Beeple does before we get into the meat and potatoes of his everydays. But yeah, check this stuff out. It's super cool. And now let's get to the everyday aspect of it. So on his everyday page, you can see he's got a consecutive day counter, 3,990 consecutive days of making an image. from start to finish. And before we dive into those, let's go back to the presentation. Let me try and remember the order of this stuff. Okay, yeah. So why are we going to study Beeple? Hopefully some of that's clear now with the introductory video that I showed you and an idea of his work. But hello, Joaquin. I see you in there. The audio of the webpage is much louder than the mic, so we can't hear you talking. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Let me turn that down. I shouldn't be playing anything more with sound, but I apologize for that. I don't think I said anything terribly important during the music, but yeah, okay. I'll turn that down since it was recommended. So, all right. Yeah, so a few reasons why I want to study Beeple, why he's had such an impact on me, and why I want to convey that to you guys as well, is to appreciate abstract 3D art. I have, my entire career, I've never appreciated abstract or modern art in a sense, because the way that I've been thinking about it is often I feel like when I was in New York looking at Jackson Pollock's whatever it is where he splattered paint all over the wall, like it was very difficult. I actually got very angry sitting in that room looking at that painting with all these people gathered around, and there was such an honor about this piece, and it made me angry because it almost came as at the expense of being like technically proficient, right? Because my 3-year-old can splatter paint on a wall. Like there's not a lot of, arguably from my perspective, not a lot of technique behind that, even though it's clearly an expression of the artist. It's like only expression without technical proficiency. And so because of that, and being a 3D artist, I think maybe you guys, if you are as well, you can relate that everything in 3D is so complex, right? From modeling to texturing, dealing with UVs, getting into shader node networks, creating procedurals, generating animation, rigging, all these keyframes that you have to add. There's nothing simple about computer graphics. So when that is my primary medium, it makes me a harsh critic of, yeah, shots fired. It does make me a harsh critic of things that don't look like they require technical proficiency. So whether it's short-sighted, it probably is. I'm not objectively the truth on this by any means, but I've never appreciated abstract art. And then I discovered Beeple and discovered how he is, you'll clearly see, so proficient as a 3D artist, but also a gifted abstract artist, that seeing the two of them combine drastically changed my opinion of abstract art. And also my perception of being around 3D art and forums and online places that showcase 3D art. There's not as much abstract stuff happening as there is like character art or vehicle modeling, like realism, mainly realism and stylistic, cartoony type renders. That's everywhere, and those are great, but it also lended to me maybe not appreciating abstract because you don't quite see it that often. So hopefully, if I'm gauging this room as well, maybe some of you share those opinions. And there's a lot of technique. So yeah, okay, already have a fan of Nathan, and yeah, I use that as an example. Again, I'm not the truth on that. That's just always been my opinion. And maybe Beeple transforming me, I can look back at Pollock and have a more appreciation for that and modern art in general. You have possibly emphasized the word wrong. Sure, like modern art, abstract art. My apologies. Maybe I'm whatever. But like, hopefully you get an idea of what I'm talking about, and you will throughout the presentation. But I would love for you guys for Beeple to inflame an appreciation for abstract art if you don't already have one. And then, all right, so from the technical standpoint, as 3D artists, I want you to take away a learning of how complex, high quality, visually impressive 3D art can be accomplished quickly and efficiently. That's what's important here. Being everyday pieces, he is accomplishing this stuff. I think I've heard him say within an hour to 3-4 hours, like a fairly short amount of time given how impactful the work is. And he's doing it every day in addition to like professional things. So that means if we can dial into what he's doing, tap into it and glean stuff from it, then our workflows can adopt some of those techniques and we can hopefully work quickly and more efficiently while also producing more visually impressive things. And with that, in a similar vein, I hope that we can be challenged and inspired by what is possible, because as we get into his work, as you're aware of how many individual images he has, and you'll see coming up like the quality of those images, you might question like, how is this possible that he has done this? You know, like he's superhuman or something. He's a crazy gifted artist or something like that. We've had people mentioning in the chat, like, or asking, like, did he really not miss a day? Like, is this consecutive? Is that legit? And yes, it is. But it means we should be inspired by it, by what is possible, because we have to admit, like, he is a human just like us, and so that's why we should be motivated, challenged, and motivated, inspired to adopt some of his techniques. All right, so I did not mean to flare up any kind of modern art debate or anything, but I don't know, have fun with that, I guess, if you want. All right, so next, how to study Beeple. That I tried to come up with some categories that would hopefully make this a little more organized and digestible for you, and one of them being or I've got 5, so the amount of detail. To me, that's kind of like an entry fee into 3D graphics, like impressive quality. If you end up below that threshold and you don't have enough detail, the whole thing kind of falls apart, and I don't even want a ticket to your show kind of a way. That's what amount of detail is, and it can be surprisingly difficult to achieve that detail. It always has been in my book, in my experience. And so that's one way we're going to look at him, the amount of detail he's able to achieve, again, in a short time. The use of repetition. So he does this very intelligently, and I taught I think it was a short course about creating these mailboxes, and it kind of hit on that idea about if you can repeat things as long as you're smart about it and you alter it slightly, in a way to like create a more visually complex image while not ruining it with repetition that breaks the illusion. So anyway, Beeple is a great example of using repetition and it not breaking down the image negatively at all. Also, we're going to look at the mastery of his shading, lighting, and treatment. Initially, I used the word compositing, but my hunch is that he's not compositing in the sense of breaking an image into multiple passes and then combining it in a compositor. I feel like he's probably getting it 75 to 90% all the way there in the 3D render, and then doing treatment on top of that, adding lens flares and altering color tones and things like that. That would be my guess. So I swapped out the word for treatment, or swapped out compositing for treatment. But those 3 things are like in my opinion, like the trifecta of polishing an image. And while it may seem less important than what is done in 3D, a lot can happen in that stage of the 3 shading, lighting, and treatment, in that they all is a marriage and kind of they inform each other. All right, so then we have abstract elements. So he, being an abstract artist, we've talked about that already, and I find it intriguing how he does that, and we're going to look at that and how the abstract elements, they just have this hypnotizing effect on me, more so than any other artist I've seen, especially in recent years. And so I'm fascinated by that. You can just get a lot out of these abstract concepts and stuff. So we're going to talk about that, and then finally the unique styles. I've not seen many people break their own conventions and be able to nail certain styles or a variety of styles and not just repeat themselves over and over and over again. In that way, we're gonna look at that and consider how he changes up the styles. Okay, so we're gonna look at it. We're gonna look at several images. Several is an understatement. We're gonna look at a lot of his artwork because, again, we have 4,000 images to choose from. It was actually very difficult for me to limit it to just a few. And okay, question from William. Let's see. I don't see a question, William. Oh, is it possible to make non-abstract art fast? Yes. William, let's see. That was your question right here. Yes, we absolutely. Right. One of Beeple's styles is he does achieve photorealism, in my opinion. Like, he achieves that in some of his everydays, probably a lot of his everydays. And he actually, one of the interesting things about his abstract stuff, a lot of it is that he'll like plop a glowing sphere in the middle of like a photorealistic scene. There's very believable reflections and refractions going on and lighting, but then he just throws the sphere in the middle of the image, and all of a sudden, like the level of interest just like shoots up, and it's such a simple thing. And so I consider that abstract, but it's in a very believable, and I use believable because, his stuff, like, there isn't necessarily a world that looks like his, or rocks don't curve like his. So in that way, it's not a photo, but everything about it besides that, the shading quality, the lighting, the rendering, all looks photoreal. So yes, you can totally do photoreal, and Beeple is someone to study how to do that quickly. And the last thing, remember, look through all of this through the lenses of he does this every day in a few hours, right? Just consider that. If you're like me and it takes a week to model like a single character, this guy's doing a much more impressive work, in my opinion, in just a few hours. So let's start looking through, well, actually, I have them in the presentation. All right, let's start in category number 1, the amount of detail. The way I've described this earlier as kind of the entry fee to being taken seriously as a 3D artist, especially if you want to be like a believable 3D artist. And that is detail, the level and complexity of things happening visually in the scene. And another way that I think of it is like it makes me feel that if I zoomed in further to the image, there would be more information there. Even though that might not be true, he's creating the illusion that there is more there. And as an artist myself, I've often run into the limits of that and realizing like, oh no, my textural density of like, or texture resolution of like 4K pixels, 4096 by 4096, it kind of breaks down after a certain place, and that limits me. And so in that ways, I've felt the limitations of detail. And even though I consider it like an entry fee, it can be harder to achieve than you'd think. And he always gets this. He always nails the detail. I mean, in several ways. Like he does it in models, he does it in texturing, he does it in lighting. And lighting isn't terribly relevant in this particular image, but we'll have some coming up. But like, look at the model quality, the geometric quality of detail. We have like big cubes with these kind of greeble effects, whether that's a texture or whether it's a displacement, something. Lot of detail in the bigger shapes, but then we have tons of these little rectangular shapes scattered throughout. Some of them reach like speck level of scale. And so that gives me the impression, and it's very impressionistic, right? Like the more we study this, the more we break it down, we can see how he does it. But like when I first see it, my initial reaction is like, I blow right past the detail problem. Like this is detailed enough. I go right past it and I continue enjoying the image, compared to if you don't have enough detail, if your texture breaks down and we see the pixelation, or if your geometry has like, rigid edges from not being subdivided enough, that will break down the image and can ruin the experience, can at least threaten the experience of looking at the image. And so in this way, like he nails it. He's got so much detail going on. These like pipes and whatever it is, scaffolding, like random stuff, like it's very, very fine. And that suggests to me that I can zoom way in and see a lot more. Anyway, so that's the first image to illustrate like detail quality. This one is less on the model and more on like a lighting. It's actually less on texturing detail and more on the concert of lighting and modeling. So with the lighting sense, how he gets detail out of lighting is he's got, let's count, 1, 2, 3 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's got 24, that's 3 times 8, right? Yeah, 24 individual light bulbs, fluorescent light bulbs in these X shapes. And so that illuminates plenty of light. But what's cool about it is in the walls over here, it adds a lot of light sources that can be reflected. So there's a lot of opportunity for reflection to be caught on the surfaces. Now the models on the sides are fairly detailed. We have trim and like they look like some sort of cathedral doors, that kind of style. But the material, if you really look at it, it looks like a very standard baseline reflective glossy shader, right? There doesn't look like any kind of grime breakup. But it doesn't need that because the lighting, when it's reflected in here, along with the geometry or across the surface of this level of geometry, there's just a lot happening. It's creating that level of detail where we don't question it. We just believe it, and we're into the image, enjoying it. There is some texture detail, which he always manages to do, putting like a grimy or some level of tileable texture on the floor that breaks up the reflections really nice, and this is no exception. We see it in there. But besides the floor, there looks like very little texture information, and all the detail is achieved with lighting and geometry. Sorry, let me see if I've been missing any. I have been missing some questions. Let's see here. Beeple is 2D only. Correct. This does not involve any 3D at all. Oh no, he's only 3D for the most part. Aside from some early years in his everydays, like he's pretty much exclusively 3D. But that's probably been answered at this point. Let me look for a couple more questions. Let's see, from Char. Is that who was asking the question? No. Sorry, I just saw a question. Okay, so from Joaquin, he uses a lot of kit bashing in libraries for complex models. That's not a question either. Question, Beeple creates an entire work of art every day or just hits the drawing board every day? It's an entire work of art. According to him, start to finish, he creates it. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have like a library of models that he sources or textures and things like that. But like he starts with a blank scene and then creates something new every day. Question, is there anyone else that has done everydays, or is Beeple the only brave one? I don't know of anyone that's done everydays anywhere close to 10 years. That is nuts if you think about it. Like, imagine what happens in a week and how many things get in the way of your art and what you want to do in a week. I mean, I have a kid now, and so does Beeple. My kids like eliminate a lot of free time and at least zap the strength, the mental strength to like want to stay up an extra hour in the middle of the night to be able to do a piece of work or something. So it's crazy that he did it for 10 years, that he's done it and he's still going. He's almost done with his 11th year. Let's see. How can that image be done in one day? That's not possible, right? Like that's the initial impression. Like it's crazy how he's been doing this. All right. Question. Will you be breaking down his approach to texturing Photoshop the way he achieves photorealism? No. I mean, I'm going to touch on some of those subjects. I'm not going to like yet. And in this stream, I'm not going to like show you how I would go about it. I do want to, if people like this stream and like this stuff, I do want to do a stream where I try to mimic some of his techniques and create an image in like a 2-hour span, something, that incorporates all these techniques. I do want to do that. That's not going to be today. Today is just strictly looking at his work and analyzing it. But I don't know how much he goes into Photoshop. I think he uses... Well, it doesn't matter, I guess. He does in some program. Image editing. He does like he must do some like tonal changes in the color, add some noise, add like vignettes or something like that. I imagine. So anyway, sorry, there's kind of a lot of questions. Hopefully, I'm caught up. All right, cool. I think I'm caught up for the most part. Okay, cool. So let's get back into the detail. I've got at least another image. Okay, yeah, this is what I thought was so interesting is like him using lighting to detail the scene. Like for me, I always think of geometry primarily, like make your model complex. That's how you achieve detail. And then the next layer is like make your textures complex. And then if you get those two, lighting will be easy and all this stuff. But like in this image, for example, all the geometry probably has very little shading information. It's not really even that complex. The most detailed thing in the scene is lights, like all these glowing bits in the windows, the lamps. He's got a variety of colors, small, big, you name it. There's a ton of light sources in this scene. And so as the backdrop, like that really details the scene. It feels like a nightscape of a city. It achieves that threshold, in my opinion, of like a believable detail level. And then on the right side, as if you weren't convinced by this, on the right side, he's got kind of a framework building or framework structure. And there is a decent amount of detail in that geometry, but he's got a glowing red light, maybe potentially a couple different lights, this blue one perhaps, inside that structure. And so he gets these volumetric rays that are broken up a lot by that geometry. So the volumetric rays have a lot of detail. The fact that the light is internal to the structure, it highlights some areas, it like illuminates some faces, and then there's a contrast, dark shadows on the other side. So there's just a lot happening in the image because of the way he sets up the lights and the geometry. And there's not really much texture or shader work that needs to be done as far as the structures. But again, he's always diligent to put a highly detailed texture on the ground plane. And all this to illustrate just the quality of detail, that entrance fee into, I believe this, as a 3D artist especially, like you've sold me on the detail. And let's see, another question from Wilco Wilbrink. Do you think he reuses older models to speed up his everydays? I do. I think for sure. If he's been doing these for 4,000 days, like, character models, for example, like, why would you need to build a character from scratch? Like, just save him and reuse him and make him posable, like store that. And then you see that evidence of that when he has characters involved in his artwork. But I think think about, he does cityscapes. So like types of buildings, fire escapes, lampposts. Like, why in the world would you do that multiple times? He's probably got a massive library of models that he's either built, potentially he's bought. There's enough evidence in his modeling that if he buys his models, buys a bunch of models, like, I don't hold that against him. Like, he's clearly a talented modeler. But yeah, at this point, like, he should have a huge library of models that he reuses. And that's something I want you to take away. Like, that's not a knock against him or anyone who reuses stuff. I think there is this kind of misconception that, and I can sense it, or I've been there too, like, if I want to give like the proper devotion to a character, I've always got to start from scratch, like sculpt him from a ball, always model the ear again, always model the hand, the nose, like always model these pieces individually. And that's just silly, right? It's not efficient. Once you've done it once, you have the chops. Once you've done it once, twice, whatever, you have chops, and reusing those pieces, nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It's actually very smart. It's one of the things that enables him to make such complex, impressive imagery as often as he does. So this use of repetition, duplicates, we just talked about this, they're rampant, right? They're all through his images, but they don't break down the image. He uses them very intelligently. And so for fun, like in the presentation, can you spot the repeats, right? So this little bracket piece, which I think I took from right there, clearly they're being duplicated around this radial shape around the lip. But if you keep looking, they're also duplicated inside the cylinder, all the way down. Okay, so these look like the exact same piece, if I'm not mistaken. And so there's an element of duplication, but there's an art in hiding the repetition. And I think in this particular image, these outer brackets are illuminated by a bright white light. And so the color looks more white. And when you look a little closer inside, these are darker and they have a much darker gray. And to me, that didn't read immediately as a repeat, but there's a slight context shift that hides it pretty well. And once you study it, obviously you break it down and you can see these things. But the point being that the most important thing is the initial impression. And I did not, these repeated pieces did not break down the image for me. And hopefully they didn't for you either. But yeah, so the art of hiding repetition, slight alterations, applying in different contexts. So that's the lighting in this example. Repeat deflectors, that's not necessarily relevant in this particular image, but in subsequent images it will be. And enough variety. So that's another thing I wanted to talk about. So if you have, let's say he approached this scene with 4 or 5 different kind of pieces that he repeated around. I think that you can get away with 4 or 5 individual pieces that you duplicate. So we have the brackets, we've got just a generic cylinder shape, we've got these kind of scaffolding, this radial scaffolding all the way around the edge. We have these little, I don't know, rivets or small holes. Like, these are various pieces that he's duplicating around, including the secondary part of the bracket, like this piece that attaches to the outer hull. That is a unique piece that I don't necessarily see duplicated. But when you have enough variety, it hides the repetition pretty well. If he only had 2 pieces and he duplicated everything around, those 2 pieces all the way around, that would probably be much more noticeable. But he doesn't do that. He does it very intelligently. He has enough variety. And let's see, the next one. I love this image. But obviously, it doesn't take you long to realize that this is a duplicate piece of geometry, like the array modifier, that's just extruded, that it's duplicated all the way down the hallway and then twisted, right? So the twist adds some visual interest. It breaks up the monotony of the repetition. That's kind of that slight alteration idea. Also, these repeat deflectors. I think this is a really crucial part of his repetitious workflow. And these to me are unique objects that drastically can can like throw a kink in your recognition of the repetition. And the lights in here in particular are doing that for this scene. He's got just 2 lights off kilter from each other, right? They're offset. And so what that serves to do, they're facing towards us, and all the repeats going backward can fade into black, basically, right? So like those are unique. That's a unique context going back behind the lights. And now going forward, all of these duplicates are illuminated in slightly unique ways. Number 1, because the whole corridor is twisted. And number 2, the lights are offset from each other. And so one light is illuminating certain aspects of the left side, and then the upper light is illuminating certain aspects of the other. And that creates enough difference, enough variety, even using the exact same geometry. And if we break it down just how exact the geometry is, he's mirroring from top to bottom, right? So starting about here and over to the middle, like this cross section, this little L shape, he's mirroring it vertically and horizontally. So he's done, even though it looks super complex, he's not done that much modeling. And it starts to make sense, like how he was able to do this in a couple hours. And then the repeat deflector idea, it's not hard to throw a lamp in there, right? Like that's much easier to throw a lamp, offset them, and then you get a variety of reflective quality. It's much easier to do that than try and model more. And so in that way, I find that repeat deflector idea really powerful for breaking up the repetition and just making this a complex, pleasing image that you can lose yourself to and not check out because of the repetition. Let's see. Any other questions that I'm missing? From William, is Octane particularly fast? I've never used Octane. I've heard it compared to Cycles pretty well. So in my general understanding, they're very similar render engines. That's not to say that Octane is fast. I mean, think about it. Like if he spends maybe I should also say, I don't imagine that he's doing the render time within that 2 to 4 hours, right? I would say that he's creating the whole 3D scene within 2 to 4 hours, and then rendering overnight, right? Because he renders them fairly big. They're very clean renders, especially when he gets into the caustic stuff. That does not render quickly, and so I believe that he renders overnight or whatever, and I don't count that against him, like how quickly he's creating the imagery. But I mean, Cycles would be able to render this overnight, no problem. And whether Octane can do it super fast. He also might have a GPU. I think I've heard him say he has a GPU, which enables him to render faster, certainly than me, only on CPU, for example. But I don't know. I would challenge you to fight the urge to focus on the tools. Again, it's 2018. Blender has a good reputation of a quality software. Like, I really just don't think Beeple would say it's without a doubt the tools, right? I don't think he would give the credit to that. In fact, I feel like I've heard him say that in one of his presentations. But I don't think the tools are not important here. That's not the main thing. It's more his technique. Like all render engines at this point have nice glossy reflections and GI based lighting and volumetrics and stuff like that. So the tools are not what's important here. It is absolutely the technique. Next. Okay, I think this is the last repetitious one. Okay, so this little capsule with a human inside of it. To me, if you just isolate the capsule by itself, I can imagine that taking like an hour and a half to create, like to model. This human character he uses in multiple images. We'll see another one where he uses this human like musculature anatomy model. So he reuses that. He throws that inside of it, and then duplicates the entire thing across the scene. So we have 3 main duplicates, but then we also see a few in the background. But he rotates the duplicates, right? So we can assume that as he models around the object, he's varying the model quality so that when he rotates it, it could arguably be a different capsule or something. At least unique enough so that it doesn't look like a 100% duplicate. You can see that the lighting is a little different on the bottom side here compared to over here. That implies that it's different, based on where in the circle like the detail's at. That's an effective way to duplicate, rotate, and get more bang for your buck. And surprisingly, the more I studied this, I was like, oh wait, he didn't even change the pose of the character. Like they're all in the exact same pose. Whereas he's clearly has that guy rigged. I would have assumed he like moved the character's arms a little bit, made him a little unique, but I don't think he did. So maybe he's just running out of time. It didn't even affect me. I had to study the image to realize that. So in that way, like he's succeeding in hiding the repetition. The difference in lighting, right? So you can break up repetition that way. He's got a strong key light from the left side. We can see from the blue glow. And then a more subtle light on the right side down here, another different color blue. But then he has probably just a plane on the top and bottom that serves with this texture to break it up. And when you break it down, like I hope you're getting that it's doable, right? It is doable in that amount of time. He's only human. So he's just very, very good at 3D production. Very good, very talented at that. But he's not able to do what would take someone 10 hours in 2, just on like doing the exact same workflow. He's just working super cleverly and in a way that hopefully motivates you and inspires you to adopt some of these techniques. Question, when you zoom in, you see grain, do you think it's because of the insufficient amount of samples or is it a deliberate use of grain? That's a good question that I've wondered myself because there is often grain and we'll see a little bit later that he also does photography. And if I recall, there's generally grain in the photography too. So there's a stylistic reason for grain, but also we know as 3D artists, there is a practical reason for grain, not having enough samples. And in this case, we see grain particularly in the volumetrics. So maybe that had some grain, but like it's also, it's very clear in the ground and the ceiling. So like it could serve as like, what am I trying to say? Dust particles in the volumetrics. So I think it's probably a mixture of both. It's probably some render sample limitations and as well as a stylistic thing, because you do see grain a lot in his images, and they don't ruin it. It's another way that they don't taint the image. I don't look at it and be like, ooh, you should have added more samples. No, it's not that way at all. I think Omar, I think you're poking fun of me. But let's see. Any other questions I'm missing? Okay, so from Khalil, it's great images, but it seems he copied ideas from science fiction movies. There's absolutely a science fiction theme running. But keep in mind, we've looked at like 4 or 5 images out of 4,000. You're going to see a lot more coming up. He is not guilty of staying in his box. He does a lot of things. So just hold on a second. You'll see a lot more. Not to say that he absolutely probably is inspired by science fiction movies, but he's also inspired by 70s era stuff, 80s, 90s kind of things. Just hold on a second. I like renders where I like renders that are photorealistic except without noise or lens imperfections. Okay, so then you might not like that about Beeple. Like he utilizes lens imperfections and lens flares and obviously noise. I like that stuff. I think it does come down to a preference. I like seeing that in photographs that I take. I like seeing that in my renders. I just think it's a subjective thing, but I think clean renders are often boring personally, but this just comes to a personal thing. But I like the way Beeple handles it, but I understand people not liking it. All right, so that's it for repetition. Now the mastery of shading and lighting and treatment. The benefits of this is that you can get more out of your models than you might think, right? There's less pressure on the models to carry the mantle of detail or carry the mantle of visual impressiveness. And this artwork, in my opinion, is a great example of if you really look at it, the model is probably 3 or 4 different types of like cathedral tower shapes that he's duplicated around and around to create this castle. You know, like I forget the name of it. There's a famous place, I think in Europe, that has a castle like structure on a rock, and the tide comes up and then you can't get to it and the tide goes down and you can walk to it. Anyway, I forgot what it's called. If anyone knows, let me know. But anyway, like he's created this shape by probably duplicating, from what I can see. Like if you look, there are duplicates. That's a duplicate of this one. This cathedral shape is, let's see if we can find another duplicate of that. Man, like, yeah, I think he's just duplicated them smaller in here. Here's another, okay, yeah, you see the spire with the round ball. Here's a spire with the round ball. Anyway, there are just repeats, but they don't even have that much texture information, if any at all. It looks like a gray model if you really look closely at it. And then he duplicated that entire castle structure, threw it in the background, rotated it so that we have, you know, this lone spire or lone tower on the opposite side as it is over here. So he's got a lot of geometric information quickly, and then how he breaks it up and makes it appealing to look at is the shading and lighting treatment. So look at the water ripples, right? This is something he uses a lot. Add a plane with some water ripples and some reflection, and you get a ton of visual interest on the bottom side of your image, right? And that's all it is. It's super simple. The terrain looks like maybe a texture that he probably reuses since he does a lot of terrain. But there's little to no texture information on there. Within the castle structure, there's a lot of lights placed that are illuminating both from below. Like you can see it illuminating up the side of the buildings. And the variety in the lighting makes that model much more than it probably is. You're getting a lot more out of those models. So yeah, things to look at in this vein are like the fog. He uses that a lot. Atmospheric fog that creates a depth to the image. And then these other ones don't really, reflections in general, in addition to just being water ripples, you'll see him use reflections a lot just to multiply the level of detail. Let's see, let's go to the next one. Question from Omar. Do you think that Beeple's style is an example of composition triumphs overall? You know, I was trying to think of how to address that specifically, the whole compositional aspect. So we know he does photography. Well, we can see that on his website. So he's got compositional understanding through photography. And in the everydays, he's talked about like his goal with them is to improve as an artist and to learn new things and literally practice making perfect and shown to the world for everyone to see. And so he's said that he wants to work on, like certain years, you know, he'll want to improve specific aspects of his workflow. And I know composition is, I'm just not as, composition to me is still more of an ethereal concept. So I know enough to know when I enjoy a composition. I don't know enough to like break it down specifically. So that said, I do think, given how long Beeple has been working on his skills, he is a compositional a significant compositional artist, and you can look to him for inspiration and for valid approaches to composition. I just don't know how to break it down, and that's a little on me. I'm trying to learn more about composition, but it's not my strong suit. Let's see. Hello, Jeff. Don't be afraid to use Photoshop. Yeah, amen to that. And the treatment aspect, super important and super useful. Okay, so yeah, we have from Thibault Burton, great composition 2, basic shapes, triangles mostly, rules of third. Yeah, so you might probably know more about composition than me. Could you study Renate Martinez? Yeah, that's another thing I want to maybe suggest at the end. If anyone else has suggestions for artists to study in later streams, yeah, I'm open to those suggestions. How did he do the rainbow flare? I think, oh, right here is what I think you're talking about. Well, if it were me, I don't know exactly how he did it, but if it were me, you can Google search lens flares, right? Well, let's do better than Google search. Let's search.creativecommons.org. So this is where I like to find, especially Flickr, I find gives the most results. But let's look up lens flare. And since these are CC copyright, Creative Commons, like you can use this for basically anything. But usually you'll find lens flares taken with a black background. Let me change the wording maybe. It's going to be hard to extract it out of here. But like, so if you could extract it, let's say that's where your rainbow flare is coming from. I've done this a lot, so I forget what search terms I use specifically. Let me try a different one. Well, this example kind of failed, but that's weird. I've done this many times. Where, yeah, I'm not sure why I'm not finding them. Maybe I had to search somewhere else. Let's try one more, and then we'll get off of this. No, it's not it. Pixabay. Yeah, that's it. Let's just try flare. Ooh, lens flare alpha. That's a good one. Internet's kind of struggling. Well, I'm sorry I did not. I'm gonna go on, but unfortunately. Okay, there we go. Ah, man, I'm coming up. Okay, here's an example. This is not specifically the rainbow color that you're talking about, but this is an image that can be added with the add operation over top of an image, over top of your render, and you've got, you know, the lens effects, and you can dial in how much you want. This is another one. It's maybe not super high quality, but here's another kind of poor quality one. This is how you go about it. It is how I would go about it in the case of Beeple, and he uses them pretty subtly, but I think it's just an image that he pastes over top of this image, right? And does it as an addition kind of thing. It doesn't need to be super complex, you know, like he's not getting actual lens flares in the render camera. But yeah, that's kind of how he does it. I'm certain, or I'm fairly certain. Does Beeple have any image that took him a week to make? If there are only days work, imagine if he puts more time. Well, yeah, that's a good point, because he does professional work too. Obviously, he's doing work for like, you know, Katy Perry's concert visuals. So he's probably not doing that in a day. He's probably spending weeks on that stuff. And the short film I showed you, I imagine that took a while, not just a day. But yeah, even though we're just studying on the everydays, like that's kind of what I want you to get out of it. That what is possible in an everyday scenario. Just type J.J. Abrams. That's pretty funny. Yeah, good call. Okay, cool. All right, so we're back on the mastery of shading, lighting, and treatment. Back to this image. Okay, yeah, so the geometry in this image registers to me as nothing to write home about. It's not super detailed. It's all very harsh edged, right? It doesn't look like anything is modeled for smooth, like a subdivision surface modifier. But there's enough detail to register as buildings, and it also helps that most of the buildings we're looking at almost parallel angles. So it kind of, you know, if the buildings were like this, you can see the detail more bluntly. But if you rotate like this, the detail kind of compounds on top of each other. all that to say, it's making it look more complex than maybe I think it is. And then on top of that, look at the amount of light sources that are in the scene. We've got something pink coming from somewhere. I don't really know. Maybe there's a sign. The logic is a sign above this screen, the frame that's like casting this pink light. We've got light coming from inside a window. That makes sense. We've got another pink light on the back wall, which is very simple. So it kind of illustrates like how simple the geometry is. A green light somewhere in there, purple light. So all of these different lights make for a much more interesting, unique image. And that is him, I would guess, like playing with light and just showcasing like how powerful it is, and how when you don't have to spend so much time on the model, it's going to be easier to let the light do a lot of this visually interesting work. Again, like always, there's a grunge texture. There's some sort of high resolution texture on the ground that breaks stuff up. He's got a rock model that he just threw in there, duplicated it, rotated it around, probably scaled. Maybe you did that procedurally, like we could do that with particles and just stick it to a surface. And let's see, anything else in here? There's not really volumetrics. He typically does have like a glow around his light sources, and that really does help to sell this super bright impression of the lights. And I imagine that is a post process. It's part of the treatment that he adds that. Let's go on to the next one. This one, to me, is just a straight up architectural visualization image where all the geometry is very, very simple. Primitive, very simple. There's even a simple texture, a tileable, wood-like texture, maybe a concrete sort of texture, but very, very short work he's made of the modeling and of the texture work. But it's the lighting and it's the quality of the global illumination that illuminates this entire space that makes things interesting, right? So he doesn't just leave the corner of the room here as a big square. He like throws in some angled structural bits, right? And all of a sudden we've got interesting shadows happening. And how simple is it just to duplicate these pieces around? And then the balls of glass, the glass orbs, like that's an abstract element that's just there to, I think, add visual interest. I don't know, there might be a meaning behind it, but what that is cool for is it takes everything behind it and distorts it in a unique way and then displays it to you on the other side. And so that adds visual interest, adds levels of detail. And because of the shading and lighting especially, this image just shines, metaphorically and literally. So this is a really cool image. I think it's photoreal in my opinion. So whoever was asking it, like doing photoreal images quickly as well. Let's see. So this is the last one, I believe, on material and lighting. What my face is drawn to, my eyes are drawn to being a 3D artist is the quality of the reflections on the floor. I love a good grunge breakup of reflections. It just makes all the colors dance and vary themselves in really unique ways. It's very tangible, right? Like I can feel with my fingertips like what the grime is like on the ground. I don't know. I just love the quality of that texture, and it's quite simple to add. You can find grunge and grime textures on the internet very simply, and that's pretty much all it is. It's just a plane, and he's procedurally adding, I assume procedurally, like these the wireframe on the ground plane. Like we know how we can do that with the wire modifier, and so if you think about it, the only complex thing in the image is happening right here in the middle. So he's got some sort of fracture modifier that Blender's equivalent sort of thing that has broken the big simple sphere and like makes all these shards of geometry that he's also scattered on the ground a little bit. And I think he's probably added a material, like we can see evidence here, of various colors just glowing, emitting off of the various shards. And that creates this very rainbowy, like prism type appearance. And that's where all the detail's happening. And he gets extra mileage by the reflection on the ground. Like reflection, that idea of mirroring the detail that's already in the scene. And so tons of visual candy happening right in the middle of the image. But then if you think about it and look outside, the ground plane, very simple. It's not hard to do this wireframe business. It's not time consuming rather. And then a very simple terrain in the background. The majority of this sphere is just a simple sphere. A sky texture, And all of that, I think, makes you focus into the image, into the center of the image with these two people. And just in a compositional sense, like draws you into where most things are happening. But it also makes it, when you realize how simple the rest of the scene is, it kind of makes sense how it's achievable within a few hours. So anyway, I really want to showcase and point to the fact that he is a master of these technical skills, shading, lighting, treatment. He's a very good modeler too. He's doing simulation, breaking, fracturing this object. He is not shirking any technical skills in order to create this imagery. He's a master at it, and therefore he knows how to milk everything that the skills can give you. And he milks it and he gets the most out of it, and in a short amount of time too. So really, really powerful use of shading, lighting, and treatment. See if I'm missing any questions. Here we go. Could we make something at CG Cookie to spend a week doing a Beeple challenge? Oh, a Beeple contest? That would be awesome. That'd be fun. If I'm honest, I would love to see some more abstract things being posted to the gallery. Not that there aren't examples. There's some really good examples of that already from an artist that I'm blanking on the name, but who does it in Blender. But yeah, that'd be cool to see more of this for sure. A contest specifically, that word always gets thrown around with us, and we do have a contest format on our website, but the big problem is just trying to get somebody to run it. Like, we've got so many balls that we're juggling right now that contest is just not able to fit in our priority list. But that would be sweet to do a Beeple challenge. Maybe we can start a thread in the forum and just, do it casually or something. Let me see if I'm missing any other questions. Question, do you think it's basic emission on those poles or something more complex shading? I think you're talking about this image here. I would bet it's either a cylinder or a plane. I'll bet it's a cylinder, because a cylinder will still render when it's glowing like that. Let me back up and calm down. I think it's a cylinder for practical reasons, because a cylinder will emit light in all directions, in a vertically, all directions horizontally. But when you render it, it looks just like planes, right? And I would guess that that's the appearance he wanted, just these simplistic 2D planes. But for practical reasons, like, if you think of adding an area light, just a plane, there's a harsh line that happens where the backside and the front side illuminate, but right on the edge, it doesn't illuminate. So that's what makes me think he's probably doing a cylinder. That would just make the most sense to me. All right. So yeah, mastery of shading and lighting and treatment. The abstract elements. I love this part. This is a very mesmerizing part of his artistry, in my opinion. And why it's so unique to me and new to me is my history is kind of in realism, especially like make it match reality, be a little creative in that, but mostly limit yourself to what is possible in reality. Whereas like this image right here, I love the idea of like ignore reason and just make something glow. That's kind of how I summarize it when I look from a practical, like recreative part of it myself, like as an artist myself, like just make stuff glow, right? So we have these bars just seemingly randomly like intersecting our character. But if we break it down before we get to those bars, those glowing bars, like we have that character that we've already seen before. He's kind of kneeling. He has high resolution textures, sure. But, as a character, he's probably not the most impressive character example that we've ever seen. We can imagine creating, it's a body with a muscular, an anatomical texture on top of it. But my guess is he also knows that. And so he lights it very interestingly. He leaves more to the imagination. He's not got a key light above and then a world environment that's just lighting up the entire texture. There's a contrast between the light and shadow that's hides enough of the character. I guess that's my roundabout way of saying that the character is not the most interesting part of the image. And so you have the character, he's kind of kneeling, there's a reflective surface, there's a light above, but then all of a sudden you throw those bars in, and this thing becomes something very interesting very quickly. The reflections all of a sudden have these beautiful gradients to deal with. The glows that he added in treatment, like it's like it goes from purple to a greenish to a red, to back to purple. Like it seems like there's always a gradient thing. That should have been another bullet point. His use of gradients is so widespread. That's a very important thing to consider. Even his glowy bits, like right here, like there's a gradient. There's a variety in color among them. And anyway, to me, this I love this image because it just represents like throw something glowy in there. The fact that primitive shapes can be fascinating, right? So we have these seemingly random pyramids right there, just laying on the ground. Let's give it some meaning. Let's say that it mimics this character's like shape as he's kneeling and holding his temple and stuff. It does kind of mimic that shape, so maybe there's some meaning there. But also, it just serves to make the image a little more interesting. It gives something to break up the reflection, and to give some play off of these bars even more. So, and this is another example where less can be more, in my opinion. Like there's not that much happening in the scene, but still we get a lot of visual interesting things to feast our eyes upon. And so I think this abstract element, just throwing the rays in there, it makes us think. Like when it's abstract, we've never seen this before. It's like, oh, that's different. Like I'm intrigued already. Like look at it. It's just like intersecting his thighs and stuff. It just makes you think way more than, I think it can make you think way more than non-abstract things, just realism and stuff like that. So let's look at some more. He uses this technique a lot. Well, in general, this whole image is kind of abstract, and just think of, if we break it down, how it can be created. You've got a cylindrical structure that's creating this hole, and then procedurally, you can create a texture that does these jut out spike-like things, and so you can generate those spikes procedurally, geometrically, but you can also create the rings, right, in various intensities going down the length of the cylinder. And so like that would be very easy to create if you are aware of, like, well, in Blender's context, like what you can do procedurally, how to enable, displacement and stuff like that. And so that's really not that difficult. It's very interesting to look at, especially I like how his rings tend to glow a little more at the ends of the rings. So it has this like what do you call it? Fiberglass? Is that what it is? Optical crap. Like fiber optics. There we go. Like that kind of appearance to it. And then the coolest thing about the image to me is how he throws in these spheres. Are they clear and refractive? I don't know. Or are they just like chrome spheres? My guess would be chrome because that would be easier to render, but he populates them, he scatters them throughout the image, he off-centers the composition of the tube, so it's in the bottom right corner, bottom right third, and it's just interesting to look at, right? Like this I think to me, this is one of the ones that clicked with me after I broke it down, like, yeah, this can absolutely be done in that amount of time. And yay for us, like we can learn from him, and he's so learn from his workflow. So that's another example of abstract element. This one to me is another example of just throwing something in the scene that glows. The whole surrounding scene is actually quite detailed. The rock quality, both geometrically, shading, texture-wise, like all of it beautiful. I would guess that he did not sculpt this or model it within the time frame. It's probably part of his library, just given how detailed it is. And so you throw that in there, you create the landscape, throw your people, you pose them, and what I find myself doing once he puts that column of light down the center is like I find myself being drawn into the image the way that the people are drawn to that same column in the image, right? They look like zombies being herded into this bizarre column of light, and I find myself doing that as well. And I just would never think of doing that in my own workflow up until seeing Beeple's work. Like I don't know, it would be much more boring if there's nothing to look at. That column of light wasn't so moth to the flame sort of thing. So I don't know. It's really challenged me to realize just experiment, get some practice throwing shapes into your scene, making them glow, because the glowing is important because it adds shadows to the scene. It adds reflections to the scene. Generally very high contrast things, potential for high contrast visual interest. Very powerful thing. I actually really want to start just playing with this. Create a scene, throw some shapes in there. I can't remember the name of this particular image, but there was a purpose. Like the column of light represented something. So there was a meaning to the column of light. It's not quite as simple as just throw shapes in there. Anyway, the next one. So this one's pretty cool in my opinion because it's extreme simplicity, right? Like you have the character that at this point we've seen enough characters. Sorry, I've probably been missing some questions. I'm going to get to those after this. But the simplicity of this image, the only complexity is the character. Now, did he spend the whole 2 hours doing the character? I don't know. I would guess not. He probably has that library. He threw him in there, posed it so it looks like he's being like abducted by an alien kind of thing. The geometry around it, super simple, not even reflections involved. But then you have this rainbow light around, surrounding the character. And I mean, it certainly did not take him that long. And now that we've spent so much time in his artwork, we're starting to break it down as to how this is achievable, given a mastery of these skills. But what's cool about this is if we just type in Imagine Dragons, like it became apparently their album cover, or they saw that image because it is part of his everydays, and they decided. I assume they asked him and hopefully paid him to use that as part of their imagery, like their album art. How cool is that? Just a couple hours and a powerful image later, you've got connections like that. You've got success of that caliber. And yeah, this is an example of how less can be more. Maybe I wouldn't look at this image and think how detailed is that, except for the character. The character does have enough geometric detail that registers to me as a detailed character. But everything else is just very intentionally simple. And yeah, I think that's all for the abstract. Well, maybe there's one more, but okay, yeah. So the procedural generation idea, like when you look at this image, hopefully if you've got experience with Blender, you know that this can be created fairly simply with modifiers in Blender, and with wire modifiers from an icosphere, and I don't know. I don't want to break it down and get too nerdy, but like this kind of shape, we've all probably been there where we play around with the modifiers and see what we can get. And even that, I've never thought of it as like a something to showcase, but like he was probably playing with that stuff too, learning it himself, and realized he could turn it into a pretty beautiful image. Like I can absolutely imagine this being hung in someone's home. Like that's kind of how I see all of his images. Like these could be printed and hung in someone's home. That it's that level of artistry and quality visual. But I love how this has just a single light source, seemingly, like in the upper right corner, very stark shadows, huge gradient across the entire image. Just using the mastery of his lighting abilities. It's all of it together creates these things. All right, so finally, the last real category that I'm looking at with him is unique styles. And so we've talked a little bit about. Oh, okay. Before I get into that, let me answer some questions. I've kind of neglected the chat. Let's see here. Question: do you think that it would add a nice little punch to his renders if he sub-D'd the stuff after topologizing versus Boolean everything? I may be wrong, but there's a lot of sharp edges that don't reflect light. Yes. So obviously when you do subdivision surface, things get a lot harder. Things get a lot more time consuming because you have to, in a general sense, you have to be more mindful about your topology. But I would guess, okay, so let me go back. Let me go back for a second and show you, it was the repetition, I believe. let's go. Okay, this one. So this he maybe he used the bevel modifier, or maybe he modeled with subdivision surface. But like this image particularly, all these models do have like edge illumination, like reflectivity. So it looks like they've been beveled at least. And in this image, like it registers that way. It seems like maybe modeling is what he was focusing on primarily. So it's not that he doesn't do it, but he chooses not to. And sharp edges, I think, given how often he's making images, he's probably decided that he likes it. It's not an oversight, but he likes the sharper edges. We've obviously seen here that he doesn't. He can do it. What am I trying to say? He can do beveled edges in that appearance, but I don't know. I'm also a very big fan of his, if you can't tell. So I don't think he makes mistakes or oversights. You know, at this point in his mastery of these skills, I think everything's pretty intentional. That's what I at least err on the side of. All right, so let me go back to the questions. But you did say like it adds a nice little punch, and I would agree. Like I'm a modeler primarily, like that's what I do most of the time, and I like to see the bevels. Sharp edges can sometimes ruin that for me, but and so I agree. It could, especially in that image we just looked at, it does add a nice little punch. Can the same techniques be applied to non-abstract art? Yes, I think so. Like this is an example, William, of his realism. He's able to achieve photorealism. This reminds me of even a little bit that the poster Ready Player One, which this image was around, I'm pretty certain, long before that poster came out. But so maybe this was inspiration for the poster. But this, to me, there's very little abstract, if any abstract nature to this. It's pure photorealism. But we see his ability to use repetition, to use the power of light sources and quality shading. You know, the volumetrics up at the top just makes it feel like a hazy kind of back alleyway feel to this. So yeah, these techniques could totally be used for non-abstract things. And yeah, so this last category is going to showcase like just a piece of the different styles he's able to achieve outside of abstract. But so first we have realism, and then next we've got, this looks straight out of like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Back to whoever mentioned that he seems to be inspired by sci-fi aesthetic. Yeah, absolutely. So but the way he treats this image, the treatment and the glow of the lights, and for some reason the rich saturated orange red of these lines, whatever they are, that's one of those abstract elements. These sinews kind of running down the rays running down this tube. Something about that feels very 70s to me, and the grain in the image as well. So he achieves that distinguished aesthetic. He also has this image, which to me looks like an 80s album cover, right? Like there's very little shading information. It's almost like it's very graphical, basically, and not a lot of shading, lighting, any of that stuff. But it looks more of an exercise in procedural generation of geometry. But his use of color here is very intentional and very artistic. He's also mentioned that he's been trying to learn color like along the way and improve his color skills. And this to me is a great example of it. But it's different, right? Like who would have thought these two artists were the same? Or the same artist between these three images. So he's really pushing at his box. He's breaking his conventions, breaking what he maybe is comfortable with. I know I would not be comfortable if someone told me, hey, can you create this image? I'd have to really think about it. Compared to if someone said, hey, can you create this image? I'd be like, okay, I know how I'd go about it. And so he's got this 80s album cover style. And this is one of my favorites, 90s Trapper Keeper graphical. And if you don't know what I mean by Trapper Keeper, let's look that up real quick. These were all the rage when I was in like elementary school. Well, apparently they're still around as a brand. But what I always think of is this kind of stuff, right? So like these primitive 3D renders with bright neon colored lights and just funny shapes. This is another example of it's like they just realized how to render 3D stuff, and they were trying to do, although that might be a painting actually. Yeah, it's probably not a 3D render. But so this kind of style, this aesthetic, I think he achieves here, and he does it several times. Like this is a theme that he kind of revisits, is style. Very unique, and it's not something to be taken lightly. Like, changing a style is changing a lot about how you see stuff. I mean, if we go look at my portfolio, it looks like the same artist did this, you know? And I don't know, I just really respect the fact that he can break those conventions, get out of his comfort zone, and create different things. Before I go on to the next styles, let me catch back up on the questions. From Nathan, in your opinion, does the fact that Beeple used Cinema 4D have a strong impact on the visual style of his art? Can we achieve similar things with cycles? C4D Octane seems to have a certain look to it, but that is just a service level observation of my own. All right, so my opinion, my professional opinion, is that no. Again, I've talked about this earlier, but like, the tools are not the thing to focus on at all. It's a gut reaction, and I understand that like, oh, his tools must be the reason he's able to do this. But it's definitely, I would say it's definitely not. It's his understanding of the tools that enables him to do this. If he was proficient with cycles, he'd be able to create the same thing. I guarantee that. Or 3D Studio Max and whatever, you know, you name it. Like, there was a time when technology was a little more varied, and I remember like using render engines that sucked compared to render engines that were good, but they're all good now. They're all good. So it's not about the tools. I personally have used Mental Ray, V-Ray, Maya software, Blender Render, Cycles, Yaffa Ray. Are there any others that I mean, PBR stuff like Unity's engine, Sketchfab's engine. Like, we're at the point in time where all of these do very similarly, you know? I mean, okay, the PBR is not like comparable to Cycles exactly, but all the traditional offline renderers, they can do the same thing. I've used them and I've done the same thing in different engines. All that to say, don't focus on the tools. You're missing out if you think the tools are the reason he's able to do this stuff. I love the glowy stuff. I agree, man. I just get lost in it, and I love it. And that's partly subjective, I'm sure, but whew, there's some fun glowy stuff. Technically, they're tetrahedrons. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe you're talking about the pyramid. But thank you for the clarification. Wow, this is PG-13. Yeah, it's about to get close to rated R towards the end. Let me see if I miss anything else. Okay. Oh yeah, a lot of the images you've chosen for today could be on a Pink Floyd album cover. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, he's and obviously like he's got that aesthetic. He does most of his renders in like a taller format, not the widescreen, you know, cinematic format. So I think he probably, and given his connection with like VJ stuff, like he's got a connection to music, so he's got to be influenced by that stuff. But yeah, I mean, we've seen Imagine Dragons use his stuff for their album covers, so definitely got an album cover aesthetic to him. Pink Floyd is a pretty big rock band, so check them out if you haven't heard of them before. All right, maybe I'm caught up. Sorry, I kind of let the questions get... Wow, you guys are talking. I love it. Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, so back to the styles. We've covered 90s Trapper Keeper graphical. Next we have basically vector art, right? So he's even out of he's kind of like crisscrossing software. You know, you usually do this kind of thing with, what is it, Illustrator or like Inkscape if you're on Linux, where it's like gradients and shapes, right? There's very little, almost no lighting information. We can tell that this big shape is a sphere that's reflecting the other shapes just because of the subtle reflection that we can see in there. And on this ball too, but besides that, there's very little information. And so, you know, he's getting into the abstract graphical world by using 3D and Octane. Like, I love to see him break out of the conventions of even the software and what they're designed for, and like making something completely unique. It's not something to take lightly to experiment in these different styles using the same tools. And then this one, to me, like we have several abstract categories, at least the way I defined it. This to me is like an abstract portrait. It almost looks like a photograph. like this was a display or a gallery piece in a museum or something, and he took a black and white photo of it. But like, you know, it's centrally framed. The composition is very central. It's this, you know, there's a theme of square shapes all around. Everything's square and blocky. But he's just very good at that, and right up his wheelhouse with the sharp shadows coming from a key light in the upper left corner, and then procedurally generated geometry. So in this way, you know, it looks to me like an abstract photo or portrait. He's also got this painterly image. I mean, it registers to me like a painting, like an oil painting or something. There's no reflectivity, but it's like the way he achieved that style to me is just fascinating. But yeah, this again looks like something that could be hung in a home. Like I think I could get my wife to buy this and hang it in our house, thinking it's a painting and not a 3D render. So yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm illustrating how many different varieties of style he's able to achieve. And I mean, this is just a scratching the surface, right? Like we've got 4,000 images that we can choose from him. So this is abstract painterly. Abstract realism. This is one of my favorite things about him that draws me into him, where all of the technical proficiency of realism is there, right? The reflections read very, very realistic. The glass refraction reads very realistically. It looks like studio lighting. So everything about the technical part of this feels real. But then this weird glass blown sphere shape is something I've never seen before. And so like it transports me into this fake world that feels real, you know, like he's able to do that so well. And he's just, you know, it's his mastery of those skills and that understanding of computer graphics and realistic rendering that frees him up to create these abstract things, to put a twist on it or a swirl, to be literal. So I like this abstract realism. Where it's like a shape that I've never seen before, or it's a light beam that I've never seen before, but everything else around it feels tangible and feels real. And then finally, abstract character. You know, we've seen his character work a lot throughout the images. And, you know, as 3D modelers, we all can probably look at this and think, oh yeah, that's just a head model, right? Like those are dime a dozen. You can find them anywhere. We can see, you know, the what do you call them? Eyelash geometry that kind of serves as these little cards. We can see those in there. We can see the mouth cavity inside, you know, the transparent glass. But he takes something simple to me, and he creates this refractive, what's the word, dispersion, you know, refractive dispersion, and makes the transparency have a rainbow color going on. He's broken up the reflections and refractions with a grunge texture. We can see evidence of that. And he's even like put some internal geometry in there. Aside from the eyes and the mouth cavity and teeth, there's like some sort of ball back here. It looks like he's almost duplicated the scalp and like pushed it into the head. And I mean, the only reason I can think of is to make it more visually interesting, to give more things, more geometry for the refraction. And like that's me breaking it down, but what every single one of these images has is when you take a step back and you just look at it, your eyes have so much to enjoy, and your mind does too. Like it challenges your perception, and in that way it keeps me coming back and back and back. Obviously has led to success for him, and this is just a couple hours, you know, like it's a couple hours every day for 10 years, and he's able to do this kind of art. So really wide variety of style. I really challenge you to look through his library as much as you can. You'll probably lose a couple hours to doing that if you're like me. And this is, again, scratching the surface. Like we've only in total looked at like 30 images out of 4,000. So pretty crazy. But the takeaways. Let me look if I've got any more. Yeah, so chromatic aberration. Let me see if that was part of the image. There might be a little chromatic aberration. There's definitely some of his renders that have it. I don't know about this one. That poor guy looks like he has a brain tumor. Yeah, maybe the name of the art has something to do with that. But yeah, okay. So you get it, Catherine. This is good. It looks real, but WTF, what is it, right? Like that's how he draws me in, and it's fascinating, and it's expanded my like appreciation and appetite for like things that challenge me visually. So pretty sweet. Here's a question from Omar. Has Beeple said he knows a bit of coding? It seems some of his stuff could be mathematically generated. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that he's ever, I've seen any evidence that he does like code-based, 3D stuff and art generation, geometry generation. But like it seems very likely given how expansive his tool set is. Is Painterly a software? No, Painterly to me is a style. Someone else already said it. It's just like an adjective for what looks like a painting. Cool. All right, so let's talk about the takeaways. So we've seen a lot of artwork, and a lot of me probably coming across as like a big fan and biased, and I don't deny that. He's probably my top artist, and has been for a while. He's been the first to really challenge my perception of art in years. So I'm a big fan of his. We've seen a lot of his art, talked a lot about what makes it great, and in my opinion. But what I want you to take away, what I want you to hopefully take away is the possibilities, the infinite possibilities in the abstract, okay? At least an appreciation for the abstract, but like what it represents to me, someone who's kind of grown bored with the stuff I've like taught or created up to this point, character after character after character, cartoon creature after cartoon creature, shader after shader after shader, all this stuff, that I just repeat and I stick inside my box, but abstract cracks open this wide world of new things, new ways to use my abilities, new ways to use your abilities, how to improve my abilities, and also how to like a new route for expressing myself. That's one thing that's been growing in me, like how to say something that I want to say with my art, not just recreate a lightsaber, not just do that kind of stuff. So there are infinite possibilities in the abstract. I hope you kind of get some of that. The fact that he is a master, Beeple is a master at these technical skills. So his abstract, I don't mean to go back to the debate, but where I maybe mistakenly can see abstract art as a shirking of the technical skill in favor of like expression or experimentation. Like he is a master at technical and he's a master at abstract. But yeah, so the rest of that quote, or the rest of that point, your ability to master the technical skills is what will liberate the artist. I think that's what I get out of Beeple is, and I'll talk about more why in just a minute, but I believe it requires him to be a master in order to convey these abstract visual pieces, not the other way around. So also, there's no better example than practice makes perfect. We can see he's been at it for 10 years. Insane. And he said, like he's posting this, that he's doing it intentionally to practice and to get better. And by posting it on the internet, he's being held accountable for that, really, really impressive dedication to it. And finally, remember that Beeple is human. So in theory, if he can do it, so can you, so can I. More realistically, like I'm not really planning on doing this for 10 years. Like not many people will. But if I can just glean a few nuggets here and there, apply it to my workflow, take that challenge and it takes me further down the road. Knowing that he's human, that's what can motivate me to do that kind of stuff. Certainly how my mind works. Is there anything else? I did want to show you about the fact that he is human and practice makes perfect. To illustrate this, you can go to his website, look at his everydays, and he's posted all of them, I believe, and he's got them in archives, right? So you can go down to year 1. Rounds are years, as far as I can tell. So round 1, he was just focusing on drawing. Round 2, he started to learn Cinema 4D. Well, okay, so let's just spend some time in there real quick. Let's look at some of these images, some of these drawings. Now he's very expressive, so he's got things to say, and They could be a little PG-13, rated R. Just be aware of that. But like from a technical standpoint, like if I'm honest, it's not like incredibly impressive work, right? He looks like a younger artist learning things. So that's his drawings. If we go back to his first years in Cinema 4D, look at some of this stuff. Yes, this should make you feel so much better. Like this is where we all started, right? Like I didn't really do stuff like this. That's already a little more advanced. Tectonic Turds is the name of this one. But like, look at this kind of stuff. He's probably figuring out what lens flares are all about. Like this simple character, like thank goodness this artist started out this way and he's posted it on the internet. Like we can see it explicitly, his progression of skill. That's what I'm trying to show you. If you go through these, you'll see round 3, that was another Cinema 4D. I think 7 out of 11 are all 3D based. And you know, like we can continue to see his work and his progression, how he gets better and better and better. Not only in the quality of his 3D, but also like, I think what he's expressing, you see a maturity and an advancement of like composition of the voice that I was talking about. So anyway, spend some time there if you don't believe that he is human and that you couldn't do this stuff too. It's all documented right here in his archives. And eventually you see him he just excels every single year and learns enough to become a just insanely talented artist. Gifted artist, sorry, talented is a questionable term. All right, now the last thing I want to end with is when he finished his 10 years in a row, he posted this image like a typographic image to commemorate his 10 years, and I want to end with that. It is a little rated R, so out of respect for social constructs and what we at this point in time have decided is appropriate language, I'm going to censor it, even though that I feel like is a disservice to the actual thing, to his message. But I'm going to censor it. But you remember this. There's been no better challenge in my opinion than what he says here after 10 years of doing this stuff. So remember it, read it to yourself, uncensored, exactly how it is. But so I'm going to read it right now. Forget checking Facebook again. Forget that picture you just saw on Instagram. Forget worrying about how many people liked your last post. Forget the news. Forget that person you really should email back. Forget your self-doubt. Forget whatever happened yesterday. Forget starting tomorrow. Forget, will people like this? Forget, will this be good enough? Forget all of your excuses. Sit down and do work. That should motivate the hell out of you, okay? And it does me, and I want to leave it with that. That commemorates his 10 years. No better authority to say that than him. No one who has documented a harder worker than Beeple, than Mike Beeple Winkleman. Wow, I almost forgot his name. How embarrassing. So yeah, that is Beeple. That is an artist study. I hope you got some things out of that, and I hope you liked it. So that's going to be all for today. I don't see any other questions. I feel one with that quote. That is amazing. So yeah, if there is any other questions from Glenn Johnson, do you have any of your own artwork inspired by Beeple, Kent? Okay, there's one image. Let me see if I can find it. It's really bad though. Like, I mean, it's hardly an inspiration. Let me see where it's at. Is it right here? It was no, I'm sorry. It was not this course. It was Art of Sculpting. Sorry, I'm almost there. This one. So this feature image right here, all it did, I think I had just seen Beeple's work, and his use of like harsh pink lighting, basically harsh saturated lighting, I've always shied away from. So when I was playing with the new feature image, I took that from him. You know, I was inspired by that. That's it, right? So that's not much at all. But I really do want to, at some point, do a stream where I try to like mimic his workflows. I try to apply what I feel like I've learned from analyzing his art, and try to create some abstract image within like a 2-hour time frame. So I do want to do that. We'll see when it actually happens. But anyway, yeah, so that is going to be the stream for today. What's up next for you, Kent? Let's see. This month, I'm focusing on doing I'm doing a stream each week, and next week is going to be a stream about freelancing. We're going to have a discussion with Lampel and Wayne Dixon about freelancing tips and sharing about our experience freelancing and what we've learned about it. We're going to do a couple other things that I'm going to publish really soon. I've got it all planned. I just need to publish it officially to our calendar. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. I'm trying to figure out what class to do next, and there's a lot of good, exciting ideas for that kind of stuff. But I've kept you long enough, about an hour and 40 minutes, so I'm gonna sign off for today. I'm glad to hear that someone thought it was amazing, inspiring about Beeple, and maybe didn't know about him before. He really is. He's really incredible, so worthy to follow. Just search for him if you want to. He's easy to find, and it's like endless inspiration. So thank you guys for being here today, and I will see you next week. So.